Hey there, it's Tom Ryan, founder and CEO of ICR. Before we get into the next episode, I wanted to ask that you subscribe to the show. It'll help us get even more unique and interesting guests on the podcast and in turn continue to educate management teams and the growing ecosystem that creates value for fast-growing private and public companies. And while you're at it, head over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star rating. Very much appreciated.
I say this all the time. There's technology to solve any problem. That isn't the challenge. The challenge is identifying those key experiences, right? Whether that are essential value drivers for your customers or for your employees, and thinking deeply about those and how you evolve those experiences.
Technology is advancing rapidly. It's not a nice to have anymore. It's a must have. In fact, digital transformation is table stakes in today's environment.
Companies are now just really thinking about consistent global experience for customers and employees. Wherever people work, wherever we serve people, trying to be consistent with that.
Being a public company can be hard. Small missteps can have outsized consequences. I'm Tom Ryan, founder and CEO of ICR, and over the last 20 years, we've helped thousands of companies understand and navigate the stock market and the media. We'll demystify these and other increasingly complex stakeholder groups so you can focus on what you do best, building your company and unlocking your true potential. This is Welcome to the Arena. Technology solutions are ubiquitous and can be overwhelming. But the initial question isn't what technology should I use? The question is, what problem am I solving for? Convergint Technologies is answering that question every day. And what they found is the more interconnected a company's technologies are, the more impactful they will be. As a global systems integrator, Convergint finds ways to utilize tools to their highest potential to create smarter insights and more efficient workflow with minimal oversight. From smart sensors that keep your buildings eco-friendly, to security systems that send data to the cloud, to technology that translate what cameras see into actionable data, these solutions solve everyday problems and they generate superior ROI. At the heart of Convergent's culture lies a dedication to service, a sense of excitement, and a commitment to the future. Nobody embodies this more than Eric Yunag, VP of Technology and Innovation at Convergint. He has a vision for the next wave of technological revolution, and at Convergint, he's literally shaping the future. On this episode, we'll dive into the future of technology and how simple, real-world problems can be solved. Let's enter the arena with Eric Yunag. Maybe first of all, you can tell us about the company and what you guys do every day.
You know, we have benefited enormously from, growth in a lot of sectors. But at the core of what we do, we're a global service company, right? And that's been focused on fire security and life safety systems. And our focus is really in the enterprise space, delivering things like card access, surveillance systems, intrusion, biometrics, all the fire systems, alarms, all the building systems that you would think about that protect people and property. And we do that in really big global enterprise complex environments, right? So you think about oil and gas, transportation, healthcare, defense, government, all those different types of environments that have difficult to solve problems that involve people and security and safety in physical space.
Like most people, I'm not a technologist, right? But I'm smart enough to know that every successful company in the next 10 years is going to have to transform itself digitally. How do you define digital transformation? Because it's this big general term that everybody knows they need, but they maybe they don't know what it means. So what does it mean to you, and how do you view your job?
That's a great question, Tom. And it's one that we talk about a lot, or I talk about a lot with some of our most progressive customers who are really at the forefront of leading a lot of these transitions. And, the Microsofts of the world, the Amazons, Intels, et cetera, are customers of ours. And I also work with them in a number of capacities thinking about that exact question. And I was challenged by somebody at one of those companies recently to think about it on par, digital transformation that is, with the fourth industrial revolution, right? And to think about this as not just another iterative technology step function, but really something that's on par with electricity and the mechanization of manufacturing and these other world-changing demarcation points in the last several hundred years that fundamentally rewired how the world operated, right? And so when we talk to customers now, we're really challenging ourselves and our thinking and strategies to root it in that kind of a context. That this is very much applying the technology of today, the AI, cloud, IoT, big data, to change the way that 7 billion people, relate to each other, they work, how they live, how the world fundamentally operates. And I think when we have that kind of a conversation and start to think about, what do those changes and what those impacts might look like in the next, 3, 5, 7 years, we have fundamentally different conversations. And so I think really at its core, it is just applying the technology we have at our disposal today to fundamentally change that customer and employee experience in the context of businesses of all kinds in the coming years.
Yeah. And I think some people, just to build on that theme, everybody knows they need to transform their organization digitally, but they might feel a little paralyzed when they think about it. A phrase I always use is you can't steer a parked car. You got to get it moving. What is the first step when you're meeting with clients or your team is meeting with clients? Like, I'm sure they sit there and they nod. And I always think people who are quiet, like when you're pitching business to them, they're either really smart or they have no idea what you're talking about. But how do they take that first step in assessing and implementing? How do you guys think about that when you engage with a client?
I'll give you a brief analogy that we use occasionally when we talk about this, and then answer the question directly. But when we talk about digital transformation in the fourth industrial revolution, sometimes I use the analogy of knocking on a door. And you think about sort of the first industrial revolution is just somebody that whatever there was wooden door, you just use your hand and you'd knock on the door. And then pretty soon there was maybe a knocker. That second iteration was sort of maybe a metal knocker. And then in the last 100 years, you sort of have this, push button doorbell, and it rang an electronic doorbell inside. And today, you can think about like a Ring doorbell as a manifestation of that, fourth industrial revolution. You think about all the things that have to happen for that Ring doorbell to provide the experience that it does, right? You have this connectivity to the internet. You have, a mobile app experience. You have a cloud service that runs behind the scenes. You have firmware updates and cybersecurity implications. You have artificial intelligence at work there. You have battery and power implications. So what has been a fundamentally the same idea of alerting somebody inside of a home that someone's at the door now, that experience has been fundamentally changed. And I like to use that analogy because it really does, I think, set the stage to the question you just described, which is, what of those experiences, trying to identify those differentiated customer or employee experiences that create value for businesses that we can start to look at and think about, well, what might a fundamentally transformed experience look like there that creates that additional competitive advantage, whether it's from a customer-facing perspective or from an employee perspective. So when you really kind of pull those things together, you can really start to ask interesting questions, because we are at a time where we can solve a lot of previously unsolved problems. And it takes a fundamentally different mindset to start to look at things from an unsolved problem perspective and start to work backwards on some of those experiences and business outcomes and say, how might we solve these differently now? And the doorbell example is a simple analogy there, but it sheds light on what's possible and what changes the expectations on how people interact with their experiences in the physical world.
One thing I always am curious about is kind of the ROI on things like this. When you're talking to companies, and obviously companies become more efficient, they can, solve previously unsolvable problems as you're describing. Is this like an ROI thing in your mind, or is it just table stakes for like every company?
The number of use cases and applications for these technologies are exploding right now. And I think today we're still at the ROI stage for sure. I think there's a bit of maybe a table stakes lens to that when you think about our evolving consumer experiences, right? When you think about what we do at the enterprise level in businesses, our expectations as consumers have been significantly altered. And you can go back to the doorbell example with Ring or others, that what we deal with in our daily lives definitely is foreshadowing of a lot of the things that are happening now at the enterprise. So back to your question, I do think there's very much, we see the ability to tie these use cases out to ROI pretty quickly in a lot of different ways, whether it be with customer experience or quality assurance or process monitoring, or just ways to bring efficiency to operations in ways that people just never had the ability to do before. So starting, as we talked about before, with that customer or employee experience lens, like what is it that the business or organization is trying to achieve at the highest level, their missional purpose, and then begin to work back into those key processes and then break them down into really use cases that we can demonstrate value on early, on bringing this on new technology to bear in some of these physical world applications. That's how we're finding the traction the fastest, right? These are reasons to invest, not just to fund digital transformation initiatives, but really to drive enterprise value from a customer perspective.
Yeah, it's almost like a second derivative thing in a way where, you're spending money on this digital transformation, but the information that you get, the next series of decisions based on that information will give you a better ROI, So it's almost like a bit of a mind bender, but I would imagine like the senior teams and the teams in the field just have better information about their clients and what they need and how they are supposed to serve them, right?
Yeah, Tom, it's a great point. It's one that has surfaced why Convergint has such a unique role to play, I think, in the digital transformation story. That largely the 20 years we've built this purpose-built, mission-critical global enterprise last-mile service organization. And as I have studied this transformation and the impact of digital transformation, I like to describe what we do best is connecting the physical to the digital world. And that's a major theme around digital transformation. And as you just described it, it is a mind bender in a lot of ways to think about, what could I know? What could I trend over time? What could I optimize when I can really begin to track all manner of things in physical space that I haven't been able to do before? And one of the most powerful ways we see that manifesting it now is with computer vision, and not to get technical, but the idea really that with AI and cameras that we are at a point in human history that we can turn anything we see into data. When you equip an organization's smartest people with that information and say, just think about that for a little while. Just go back and think about that anything you can see, you can turn into data. That's behavior, that's process, that's just anomalies, anything, whether you just want to see trends, something good happening over time and look for the anomalies, or something bad that's happening over time. Anything you can see, you can turn into data. And then what might you do with that data to either optimize, improve an outcome, reduce costs, change a customer employee experience? That's a mind-bending exercise, right? And it starts to really when we connect with the digital transformation themes with our customers and groups or leadership initiatives that are thinking about those kind of ideas, and then we give them the idea that we're able to deliver that data for you, or we're able to connect that experience for you and turn it into something that you can measure, see over time and optimize. You really get a flywheel effect out of that conversation. And it's really fun and fascinating to see that unfold across lots of different industries.
Eric and his team clearly understand the importance of data. Providing analytical insights gives organizations the upper hand in the modern digital world. I asked Eric for an example of how a company had used data insights to improve their decision-making process.
I'll give you two specific examples in two different industries. Start with one in the financial industry, one that we're working on with a top 5 financial institution in the country. And this is a very, very tactical use case, but it just goes to show you where this is applied and how it can be connected back to the return on investment and customer experience. And this particular financial institution operates thousands of remote ATM machines, right? We all use ATMs, and many of them are detached from banks, right? They're in lobbies or vestibules. And one of the things that they know from a security perspective, and this will connect back to the business, is that when they have, vagrancy or, loitering issues in their ATMs, clearly the ATM usage goes down, right? And the fees that you generate, the revenue they generate from those ATMs goes down. In parallel to that, anytime that there's, excessive amounts of garbage or refuse in an ATM vestibule, the same thing happens. And so with computer vision, you're able to look at pose detection of people, and not from a facial recognition perspective, but just say, look, this person's either sitting or leaning, and you're able to alert either authorities and dispatch that. But the same way with garbage or refuse in an ATM vestibule, if there's, you can look at the scene and say, hey, there's a certain amount of refuse in this lobby. Odds are, percentage-wise, that there will be less usage when this happens. Dispatch, janitorial services, etc. And so, rather than having, in the past, they would have people go out and do these checks and look at these things, or dispatch guards, and now camera to a monitoring center that's doing automated alerting and dispatching of these services that, not only reduces their cost to operate, but it improves their customer experience and drives, high margin revenue through their ATM usage.
It seems so intimidating and complicated, but when you think about like the Ring doorbell and, the ATM, it's like really simple, like this isn't, the technology might be complex, but the application is super simple. You were going to tell us another one too.
Just to affirm your point, it really is, the complexity a lot of times is identifying these use cases, right? Of the discipline to sit down and break things down into little parts and to think deeply about your customer journey and where are there points of friction and where might you improve that in a way that really, again, to your point about being table stakes, I think that's where the organizations that are moving faster now are creating that pace right now, right? They're setting that pace, they're setting that expectation for customer experiences that others are going to have to catch up to. So really, really powerful themes there from a value creation perspective and competitive advantage point of view. Another one, you mentioned retail, and we work with some large retailers, a large home improvement retailer is the example I'll give here, and they've been using some of these computer vision technologies to reduce shrink in ways that most organizations don't, right? Tying it back to, looking for proactive or active shoplifting to limit shrink. And that's kind of a traditional use case in our world. But what that's emerging to is using this camera infrastructure. And this is a conversation we have often, is stop thinking about your camera infrastructure as security, fire, and life safety, and start thinking about it as a visual intelligence platform. And how could you use this? And the way this retailer is starting to think about that is, how do we mirror the experiences that we have online in physical space? And, how can we identify the high-value VIP shoppers? How do we reduce friction in checkout? How do we alert this person when they walk into a store that this is the things that they typically buy and here's the sales on those things? Imagine, we all know kind of the experience that we've become accustomed to in the last 20 years of e-commerce and online shopping experiences and the amount of friction that's been reduced there, right? Our ability to check out frictionlessly and to be recommended products and all those things that happen. And you begin to very quickly visualize how you may be able to bring those same experiences into a physical brick and mortar store, and what an incredible competitive advantage that can become to retailers who begin to move in that direction.
Totally. I mean, I think, for a lot of the physical retailers out there, they've been, kind of punched in the nose for a couple of decades. And, now there's tools available for them to play catch up and actually get the same insights, or maybe even unique and different insights than their online retailers or direct to consumer might have. So that's like super incredible.
Well, you think about all of the web metrics, right, that we've kind of become accustomed to now, like visitors, dwell time, how many page views, all these things that you use to optimize an online retail experience. And now you think about your ability to do that in the physical world, right? You have, if you had 10,000 shoppers in a day, maybe you had a high concentration in this particular department and in this aisle. And there's technology out there now that do gaze detection. Are they people looking at this specific product, and did you convert that shopper to a checkout line on the way out? And you think about those metrics that have driven massive improvements to online retail, the experience and profitability and growth, and retailers' ability to optimize the experience based on all those metrics that you've never had in the physical world. It also brings up some challenges with these ideas, which is privacy, right? You think about, we all have essentially forfeited our privacy online, and it seems to be more visceral in the real world when we're saying, oh, geez, they're tracking me in a store, yet I'm willing to give up all that information online every day and have it actively tracked and used to promote, my personal information. There's a lot of really interesting conversations in there that, we have to have with conversations as well, because we understand there's, one of our roles really is to be that, strategic guidance, provide that strategic guidance and what's happening in the world. And these are themes that we study and think about a lot. And, responsible use of this technology is key, right? But there are some areas where there's an artificial friction there, and there's some areas where there's absolutely legitimate concerns, and we need to manage those things appropriately. And there's like any new technology, look, the internet in early days, who would have thought of all the good that's been created, but also all the extraordinarily negative things that have occurred. And we're in a similar cycle with a lot of these technologies as well.
Yeah, unintended consequences, but it's another rabbit hole. What industries and geographies, and I just think this is just interesting, like are kind of maybe less on board than others? I mean, I assume all the technology companies, they get the joke, they understand they have to be transforming their businesses for both external and internal stakeholders. Are there any, you're working with companies all over the world. Are there some areas that, you feel like, hey, they could be more adoptive of this technology? Or if you want to answer the question differently, what industries and geographies seem to be like all over it, fully embracing, jumping in with 2 feet?
I think the embracing side of it's a little bit easier to wrap our heads around right now. So we see applications and interests across the board, certainly, and varying levels of geographic adoption. I think the world, our worldview is very much global enterprise centric, and so particularly with these conversations that I have are really with those companies. And so what we see is a move towards consistent experience, right? Whether that be for employees or customers. And you think about all of the implications of global pandemic on how people work, as an example. Geography seems to be less of an issue than it would have been even 5 years ago, where companies are now just really thinking about consistent global experience for customers and employees, wherever people work, wherever we serve people, trying to be consistent with that. So I think, to me, it's less geographic sensitive than it is industry movers and adoption right now. So I'll maybe speak to it from that side of things. And as the world becomes more connected in real time, I think that the geographic part of it becomes a little less important as it has been in years past. Another one right behind there is healthcare. I think we're seeing early signs of big healthcare organizations really beginning to think deeply about how does this apply to the healthcare experience, right? And look, anybody that's been to a doctor or anything in their lives that knows that it's a sub-optimized experience, right?
You walk in, you get the clipboard, you fill out all your stuff every time. It's like ridiculous.
Oh my gosh, it's unbelievable. I mean, for the amount of money that goes at healthcare, and look, for an aging world, the experience expectations. I don't think any of us, right, that had parents go into assisted living and all these things, our expectations for what those experiences are going to look like are going to be dramatically different. And so there's big themes around healthcare in general, but the ability to bring this idea of connecting the physical to the digital world and optimizing patient care, patient experience, optimizing outcomes in general, right? I mean, just if you were able to have a nurse 24/7, 365 looking for these X number of things in a healthcare environment, what would you be looking for? You're able to do that with computer vision now, and beginning to think about how all that fits together for how healthcare organizations invest in technology platforms that do that is we see more or less every major healthcare organization beginning to consider that and implement pilots and programs that are exploring what that's going to mean to their organizations. Because to your point, right, there's a first mover advantage here from a competitive perspective, but it also creates an expectation that everybody has to follow at some point in the future. So healthcare is absolutely another one that's moving now. Manufacturing also is another key piece, right? We're all experiencing supply chain challenges right now. Clearly, there's holes in our system in how we operate this interconnected world of supply chain, and the ability to optimize optimize manufacturing processes with all of this connected technology as well is another incredibly powerful theme, I think. And we see a lot of major brand name manufacturers, blue chip kind of manufacturers, really thinking about what does it mean for us to use these kind of technologies to connect, equipment and machines, in real time to look at supply chain and optimize processes and, again, reduce the human component of the processes dependent upon labor, the quality issues that you can optimize out of these things. And we had a fascinating conversation with a food manufacturer that everyone would recognize, talking about optimizing the production of their pizza rolls on the supply chain using computer vision and looking at anomalies and how they were packaged and everything else that no one can look at in the speed that a camera could. So all these little things, when you think about the experience, and it all comes back to the experience, right? On what is your customer employee experiencing, and really thinking deeply and having that customer employee intimacy about where is there friction or where are there problems that we haven't been able to solve before that are unoptimized, that now we can really dig into those things.
With the COVID pandemic emptying offices around the globe, it can be hard to picture a time when everyone's back at the office. Yet with the rapidly advancing nature of technology, Convergint is finding ways to make the office safer and more appealing to workers. I wanted to find out how technology can assist people as they return to the workplace.
In my role of interacting with organizations and a lot of different verticals and innovation departments, et cetera, just the acceleration of willingness to change, right? Has there ever been in the history of mankind kind of a forced change management exercise on human behavior for 7 billion people in 18 months, to this scale? There really hasn't, right? And so, how you work, how you operate, how you interact, all these things. And I think that single fact to me is why it's such an accelerant for digital transformation, is that you had simultaneous forced behavioral change for 7 billion people all at the same time. It wasn't a slow adoption, right, of different behaviors of online and digital and all these things. You had everybody at once in 60 days having to say, we're doing everything differently, right? And I think that when you recognize that, you sort of see what I think digital transformation was moving much slower prior to this for obvious reasons. And then all organizations of all kinds have recognized, how much, I'll say, the inertia of their, thinking has trapped them into a way of doing business, right? And we were all forced to fundamentally throw everything out the window and reinvent from scratch how we operate, how we interact. And the efficiencies we all recognized out of this were undeniable. And think of the cost that we've all taken out of organizations around, you can't say unnecessary travel, because some travel is certainly necessary, and face-to-face obviously is there, but just the willingness to look at processes and say, what could we do and how do we do things? What could we do differently that is essential, right? It made everybody get laser focused on what was essential and how to do it in the most efficient way possible. And I think that is, at its core, the best way to think about digital transformation, right? It's just we have so much technology at our disposal now. It's not about the technology, and I say this all the time. There's technology to solve any problem. That isn't the challenge. The challenge is identifying those key experiences, right? Whether that are essential value drivers for your customers or for your employees, and thinking deeply about those and how you evolve those experiences. So, if you think about your employees or your colleagues as essential connected assets, and their identities, their location, who they're with. So those are all things that with these technologies you're able to understand better, right? If you think about technologies that understand who is in different rooms together, different floors together, different buildings together, how many people are there, how long were they together. All those things are important for making decisions on, exposure and managing, the pandemic or endemic conditions that we're in now. Occupancy levels, managing the local. That's a very complex issue to manage for a lot of organizations because they're granular, right? You may have a state regulation. You may have a city, a county, and having to manage all those, in real time. Doing it with technology is a much better way to do that. Frictionless experiences is another big area of focus for customers now. Thinking about just not touching things in and out of buildings, right? And this gets to again, facial and recognition of people and proximity sensing and being able to unlock doors and operate elevators and different things that, look, we've become accustomed to, right, in our mobile experiences and our phones, and being able to use what you and I do every day, right? I recognize Tom because I see your face and I know it's Tom, right? I don't question that. I don't look at my daughter and wonder, geez, is that my daughter? I know because I am looking at your face, right? So that's an interesting topic, right? There's a lot of challenging optics around facial recognition for good reason, right? It's a big societal issue.
Another rabbit hole to go down, right?
Huge rabbit hole. We'll avoid it. But just from a practical functionality perspective, we all do this every day, right? As people, the challenges stem from how people use that data on the back end. But when you think about how those experiences can work in getting into a building and removing friction and accessing physical space, and honestly, a lot of this starts to unlock new opportunities around optimizing space usage, right? I mean, we all think about how much physical office space we're now not utilizing that we're paying for, right?
I'll tell you what, it's actually amazing because it's infinite applications for every industry, it seems, right? I mean,
yeah, Tom, I think that's, it always sounds like hyperbole when I say that, right? But yeah. I've had the benefit of looking at this from a very detached perspective and working with our customers and seeing it through their lens. And, when I say unlimited use cases or an infinite number of use cases, I truly believe that. I think it's like electricity. If you, like in the beginning, when you started to invent electricity, you think I can turn on a light, right? That's the killer use case. And then, ultimately we power everything in the world with electricity. And I really do believe, and I use this analogy all the time, that this is like mechanization or the invention of electricity or mechanization of manufacturing, I should have said, where we have no ability to see what the implications are in the world in the next 10 to 15 years. But what I know is that it is applicable everywhere. It's happening right now, and it is going to fundamentally change the way the world works, and we're all going to get to live through that.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, I love the passion for this. I know that's a function of the culture at Convergint, which is so great. I've met some of the senior team there, and I know that's such a huge part of your success. Super eye-opening conversation, and I think the biggest takeaway for me is I'm not a technologist, but I feel like I kind of get it. The actual nuts and bolts of the technology is in the background. Someone's going to figure that out for me. It's just, hey, what insights do I need to draw to be more successful and more efficient? And so I think this has been a great conversation. Would love to have you back on at some point and hear more about what you're doing.
It's my pleasure, Tom. Thanks for having me.
In a fragmented society, it's good to know there's people making connections. Convergent's integration connects teams and free up valuable resources. And there's a lot to be learned from their approach. Are all the systems in your business integrated? Do your teams work seamlessly together? Are your employees on the same page? What could you accomplish if this was the case? I'd like to thank Eric Yunag of Convergint Technologies for joining us. It's really incredible to think what the future holds in terms of data, business efficiency, and actionable insights. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review the show wherever you get your podcasts. It really helps. We'll see you next time, back in the arena.
References to specific stocks are not intended to be recommendations for specific trading behaviors. Comments presented on this podcast are intended for informational and educational purposes only, and do not represent opinions or recommendations on whether to buy, sell, or hold shares of a particular stock. All investors are advised to conduct their own independent research into individual stocks before making a trading decision. In addition, investors are advised that past stock performance is no guarantee of future price performance.